Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a YUNOREVIEW, where I go over a series of records that I didn't have a chance to do a formal review on over the past month or so. I give my thoughts on them in brief here. Let's go. I wish I could get into this Cult of Luna album as much as many of the metalheads I'm seeing around the internet are, but I'm just not really all that crazy about this particular brand of post-metal. It's just so slow-paced, and I don't find the sound or aesthetic of it all that interesting. While it is atmospheric and it is sludgy, I just don't find it all that heavy or heavy enough to interest me. And then a lot of the guitar passages to me just read like very watered-down post-rock bits. The vocals are kind of savage, but across the length of the entire record, I think they could use a bit more variation. It's okay. It's all right. It's not bad while it's on, but it's not anything that really excites me or stirs up anything in me, honestly. Squid EP. Check out this band making fantastic post-punk music. Oh my god, the energy of these tracks is excellent. The intro track is a bit odd in how drony and abstract it is. Didn't really anticipate that, but the other more rock-oriented cuts that come after are great. Can't say it's all that substantive, as it's really just a very short EP with a handful of cuts on it, but it is one of the better EPs I've heard this year. No question, no question, no question. And it's definitely got me wondering, where's this band going next? What is the next sound? What is the next record? I want to hear more. Let's go! New Men I Trust record, which I've been getting a lot of requests for. A lot of requests for. And I've gone back to it again and again and again and again. And it's pleasant while it's on. There's some pretty good tracks on here too. But I'm just failing to enjoy the entire record. I mean, this thing is a pretty sophisticated and slightly groovy, maybe even a little jazzy dream and indie pop record. But it is so long and kind of faint and a little one-dimensional too. I mean, I can't really say there is enough variety and highs and lows across the 70-minute LP to justify the length. By the time I'm on track 12, I'm like, okay, this is pretty good, but I mean, unless we're going anywhere with this, I'm just about done now. While I admire the ambition that went into this many songs being on one record and basically how passionately the band are essentially diving into all of these dreamy nooks and crannies, wider scope, the whole thing just seems a little narrow in focus. But hey, if you want a really long, chill, dreamy, poppy album, listen to it. New Korn record. I can't say that this is a horrible album. It's not. I think Korn has returned to form a wee little bit on this record. There are some tracks that are easily some of their worst on here, like Ringmaster, which is absolutely obnoxious. However, Jonathan Davis and company are sounding pretty solid on this one. The vocals are pretty intense. The drumming is good. I wish the bass lines were a bit more out there like they used to be when Fieldy was in his prime, but they're just not really there. The band sound generally is a lot cleaner than I think it used to be, a lot smoother than I think it used to be, not as animalistic, but it's not the path of totality. It's not the path of totality. I've been waiting to see if an interesting opinion bubbles up out of me in regards to this new Willow Smith record for a while now, but unfortunately, it's just not the case. I don't think it's very good. I get that she is letting loose a little bit, and she is letting her freak flag fly a little bit. This one's more acoustic. This one's certainly artsier than her last record. Seems like she's less inhibited on this one, but some of the production is really rough. Some of the singing is very bad, and some of the lyrics aren't really all that great either. I mean, it's cool to hear Willow in a context where she doesn't seem like she has any limitations to what she could try to do if she had it in her heart to do it, but I think there's a lot of skill lacking here. Skill in writing, skill in performing that is going to need to be brushed up on for any future release from her to be interesting. Ceremony is back, and they are once again diving into the post-punk transition, the classic post-punk transition that they made not too long ago with their last record that was incredibly lackluster in my opinion. This one is actually a lot better. Nowhere near as good as their hardcore punk stuff, but better hooks, better writing, better production on this one. It's just still painfully derivative, though, when it comes to this style of music. While I don't mind bands dabbling in this classic Joy Division, Bauhaus-esque post-punk sound, maybe a bit more angular grooves on this one, a little Devo-ish at points. I wish that the approach they took was a bit more memorable, distinct, but it's not. However, I will say again, improvement. So maybe the next record will be even better. New DIIV record has some pretty nice textures on it. I will say that. It's definitely not the most creative record out there that has a shoegazy slant to it, though, when it comes to sonics, and ultimately what makes this record so lackluster to me, because the sound is quite nice when it's on. A lot of the songwriting is kind of dull. Definitely highlights on here, but a majority of the songwriting is very, very dull and not that memorable. If I take away anything from this record, again, it's the textures, which, once more, are not the best I've heard in my entire life. It's just very middle of the road, I guess. But if you got to hear every sound and every record in this style, then I guess try it. The new Slayyyter mixtape, which I was pretty psyched to try, given how enjoyable I thought a lot of the singles leading up to this thing were. But a lot of the tracks on this thing are previously released songs, so there's not a whole lot left up to the imagination here. There is a lot of Britney Spears worship on this thing, especially the edgier side of her discography, those toxic type tracks. That tends to be where I think Slayyyter gets a bulk of her inspiration. Though I will say the production is slightly more futuristic than a lot of what Britney Spears was doing around that time, and that's certainly what puts Slayyyter in line with the Charlie XCXs and the Rina Sawayamas of the world right now, though I don't think Slayyyter is nearly as bold or putting as interesting a spin on her 2000s pop inspiration. That's really what I would truly love to see from Slayyyter going forward, and maybe we will. There's definitely potential here. New Kano record. Did not like this one as much as Made in the Manor. Just really melodramatic to me. I love so many of the grime cuts off that last album, and there just wasn't really enough of that on this new one. I thought the production was weaker. When he sings on this one, it's not really all that good. Just a really scattershot record that tries to deliver the audience a slightly more introspective, emotional tone, but for the most part, that kind of fell flat for me, so just not really into it, sadly. Oh, this new Pixies record. What do I even say at this point? The comeback is not good. It's just Opeth, new record. Once again, English and a Swedish version of this one. That's nice. And the band is still kind of inhabiting this space where they are coming out with some slightly vintage progressive rock with some very glossy production. I'll say that this record is a bit more theatrical than their last one, but I find a lot of the compositions to be a little long-winded. I think that the vocals aren't really all that interesting either. It's well produced. It's very clean. It's very tight. Very derivative, though. But that's pretty much par of the course for everything in the progressive rock vein the band has done thus far. I mean, this has really marked the most uninteresting era in Opeth's entire career thus far, but it seems they just have a really deep passion for it because they are not letting up. And I assume hardcore fans care for it quite a bit, so not sure I have much more to say about it other than if you love some old school progressive rock, but with some newer, more modern, slick, clean, theatrical sounds, and you've been enjoying everything that Opeth has been doing in this proggier era of their discography, try it and you'll most likely dig it. I love that Milo has grown in profile so much that he can essentially start a poet gang, call it Ruby Yacht, and come out with a record. This one is, it's not bad. The instrumentals are pretty creative, though many of them do get very repetitive. I mean, the loops are nice anyway. And there are a lot of very wild rap styles and deliveries across this thing. Even Milo himself really gets out of his comfort zone and starts giving us flows and inflections you wouldn't typically hear on one of his solo efforts. But I gotta say, the talent gap between many of the members of Ruby Yacht is at least wide enough to notice. You know, there's not a whole lot of consistency across each member, and as a result, the quality and just the sound, the cohesion, I think, suffers. Everybody's doing their own thing, even if at the end of the day you can couch all of it into this very esoteric, weirdly abstract, maybe even a little tongue-in-cheek rap style. New Liam Gallagher record. It's okay. It's a lot like the last one, frankly. I mean, and not that that's a bad thing. You know, if you're crazy about his brand of singer-songwriter music, his brand of Britpop, you're probably going to dig on it. You're probably going to dig on it. The production is quality, sometimes a bit too high gloss. The songwriting, for the most part, is solid, but I mean, if you've been listening to Liam's songs for years, there's nothing really all that new on here. A few tracks rock a bit harder than others. It's very middle of the road. It's very middle of the road. New Jenny Hval record. I was pretty excited to listen to this one. Unfortunately, I found many of the tracks to be pretty one-dimensional when stacked on top of each other as an album. As individual tracks and as teasers, I did enjoy the mystical, linear, groovy vibe that a lot of these songs brought, but there's just not really enough variation across the entire LP to make it an interesting listen from front to back, which is kind of unfortunate because I thought that a lot of the material off of Jenny's recent EP was pretty good. While I do think this album is one of her most accessible releases yet, I think it could have used a bit more variation. I am struggling to think of an emo trap record that has worse lyrics than this Lil Tracy album. Like, nearly every track has one garbage bar after another, and the singing isn't even good. It's easily one of the worst releases in this genre. Why are we getting another not so good M83 album? Makes me sad. New Lumineers record. Not interested. If I wanted to listen to basically all of the most generic tropes of indie folk from the 2000s and watered down in such a way where they're nearly soulless, I would just watch a car commercial, because that's most likely where you're going to hear music like this, in a car commercial. Oh, this new Kemba record. I was so excited to try this. I thought that I was going to end up loving it. Kemba, formerly known as YC the Cynic, really talented New York rapper, and there are definitely tracks on this album that showcase that talent really well. And I'm enjoying some of the personal themes coming out in this record as well, because there are some verses and tracks and moments that focus on the fact that he's recently lost his mother to a stroke, and those moments are pretty dark, pretty intense. But the record generally is his most inconsistent yet. He tries out so many different instrumental styles, songwriting styles, more singing, different flows and deliveries. And while I do appreciate that, because prior Kemba, or YC, was usually a pretty one note, but still incredibly talented rapper and lyricist. Like, dude can spit and spit and spit and spit. Sure, he usually stayed within the realms of hardcore hip-hop and jazz rap and more boom-bap-centric styles and sounds. And obviously he's branching out here, branching out being a good thing. But I think a lot of the sounds and what he's attempting here has not been entirely smoothed out yet. So there are some again, attempts at stepping outside of his comfort zone that I think are very rough around the edges and could use quite a bit of work. Still, though, I do encourage, generally, you know, stepping outside of that comfort zone and trying new things and doing something different, but I still think there are a lot of kinks that need to be worked out here in terms of individual songs not going over all that well. And finally, there's so many various ideas spread across this record, it doesn't really come together all that effectively as a project. It feels almost like a compilation or a very scattered mixtape. So with this one, I definitely admire the ambition. I like some of the personal themes, but I think the execution could use quite a bit of work on this one, unfortunately. New Metronomy album. I'm struggling to decide if whether or not this is worse than their last one. And not that every song on it is terrible. There are some pretty funky, fun, tongue-in-cheek tracks here with some good lyrics, some memorable choruses. However, those are very much canceled out by the songs on here that are annoying, by the songs on here that just seem like completely unnecessary interludes that don't add anything to the track list. It's very much a mess. The highlights are not enough to keep all of it afloat, in my opinion. Certainly not one of their better ones, I'll say that. All this time, and I'm still yet to really get into Melanie Martinez, and I can't say that this new record is doing much better. I mean, I do think some of the songs on this one are more interesting than her last full-length LP, but generally, I just don't find her vocals all that great. I don't think the production is all that interesting. The best thing that Melanie typically has going for her is just her eccentric look and vibe and the concepts that she usually laces throughout her albums. I mean, those are all pretty cool, but I just don't think the music, the writing, the instrumentals are nearly as out there or as creative as the visuals and the vibe and the themes that Melanie presents. New Gatecreeper record, which is a pretty heavy death metal record. If you're looking for some mosh anthems, it's not bad. I think it's kind of one note, and I don't care that much for the guitar tone on this one. It's just got this very high-pitched buzz to it that gets grating to me after a while, not really in a good way. Again, it's some pretty throttling modern death metal that's relatively badass. If you need that itch scratched, listen to it. Given how good their compilation was, I am very sad to hear SeeYouSpaceCowboy transition from being one of the more interesting revivalists of this spazzy, post-hardcore, metalcore sound, and now they've essentially become a group whose music I am scrambling to put back into the CD rack at my local Hot Topic. The chunky riffs and the breakdowns and the vocals and the lack of eccentricities on this one, frankly the eccentricities that the compilation have on many tracks, is just not pleasant to hear. New girl band record, and I thought I would like this one more than the last one, and I definitely love the roots of what this band is trying to do here. You know, the noise rock influences, the no wave influences. There are points where it's savage, but I still don't think the band has that interesting of a sound. It's not abrasive enough sometimes. And I occasionally think some of the tracks here are pretty repetitive, and not really in a gratifying or a hypnotic way either. So, I don't know. It's kind of animalistic. It's got some guts on it. I just don't think it's the most interesting noise rock I've heard. And that's really all there is to it, I think. New Titus Andronicus album is certainly less shoddy and more consistent than their last record, but the productions are okay, the performances are just okay, the singing I think could be reined in a bit more direct and less like Patrick is just growling over a lot of these instrumentals indiscriminately. The sloppiness of it, I think, takes away from the potential that a lot of the songwriting has. And some of the songwriting isn't that bad. You know, it's that continued and somewhat quality mix of punk rock and Americana and folk that Titus Andronicus is known for, but just with a lot less gratification. For me personally, anyway. Ugh. Kim Petras just stands Halloween. This is her second project, an even longer one, where she's just coming up with spooky Halloween-themed pop. Sadly, I don't think it's as good or as consistent or as well written as Clarity. It could be scarier. I mean, the lyrics are a little edgy and bloody and morbid, but certainly the sound of this thing, I think, could be going into a darker place. Though I do give her credit for singing over more instrumentals that have a bit more of a synthwave quality to them. You know, that classic 80s synthwave sound. It sounds like something out of an old horror movie, a B horror movie, a slasher flick from years and years and years and years ago. Again, not as crazy about it as Clarity. I think it's a bit of a mess sometimes, and some of the hooks are not really all that great, but if you're fine with trading that off for some Halloween vibes, some Halloween-themed pop, why not? Zishin, and thank you for watching this latest episode of the YUNOREVIEW. We will link you to the last one over here next to my head somewhere, so you can check that out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, YUNOREVIEW. See you in the next video. Forever.